Awesome. And we're now streaming. We have two new players and GMs joining us today. And we have John, who will start off with John, and then we'll talk through Paul. And today we're going to focus on players. John, go for it.
My name's John. I started playing when I was 8. I started playing AD&D Second Ed with my mum and my dad at home. So that's what started me on my role-playing bent. Yeah.
Cool.
Awesome.
Thanks, John. Paul.
Now, John, you're making me feel old. So I started playing, about the same age. I was about 9 or 10, D&D, but that was Redbox, the classic Dungeons and Dragons first edition. So yeah, that's where I cut my teeth.
Cool. And if everybody else could do a one-liner starting with Duane.
You want the same thing?
Whatever, Duane. You can say whatever you want. This is not child-friendly.
So is it a reintroduction? Is that what you're looking for?
Sure.
Okay, so I am Duane Woods from Vancouver, and I'm in Paul's gaming group, and I started gaming, I believe it's 31 years ago. And here to discuss all things RPG.
Cool. Bill is really William, and so he's going to go last today. Stephanie, do you want to go next?
Sure, I'm Stephanie Phillips. I've been gaming for about 5 or 6 years and GMing for a couple of those.
And then I'm Bill Best, or William Best, and same as Steph. So 5 or 6 years of role playing, GMing for a couple. I've been playing with Steph and Eric for most of that time. So
cool. So we're going to focus on players today. I'm going to ask all of you, like, what are the 3 things when you think about players? So I'll ask all of you to give me 1 to 3 of what you think about them. I'll start, so I'm giving you some time because obviously you're all surprised by this question. You have no idea what's going to happen next. I often think the number 1 thing for players is that they enjoy the game. And sometimes that means changing the game. Sometimes that means involving players and their particular secrets or stories in a unique way. Finding the right players is really hard. Finding a set of players that kind of work together can also be really hard. I'm going to suggest Paul goes next, and then we'll go Duane and John.
Yeah, 3 things about players. I think the thing is, I gotta agree that players get together to have fun with the game. There's no doubt about that idea that they come together to do collaborative storytelling and to really experience an adventure together is wonderful. They are human beings, fortunately and unfortunately, and so that means that they bring all of the foibles of being human with them to the table, which can be great and incredibly maddening. So yeah, players. Can't play the game without them. Sometimes you wish you could.
Paul, you're out of the next game, by the way.
That's it. Yeah. I've been kicked off the island right in the first intro, right?
The very first thing, or the most important thing, is that everybody has fun. It's a hobby. It's a leisure activity. So if you're not having fun, then you got to find something else to do or change it up so that you do have fun. So that's the main thing. Finding the right players, and then I guess it's finding the right mix of players for who is playing and the style that you like to play and the style that everyone else likes to play in. Sometimes you can shift to different styles, depending on different people running a game or a particular game. So that can affect it as well. But so there's a variety of factors that can affect it. But the main thing is that if you aren't having fun, then either change it up or find something else or another group. Luckily, I haven't really had much of that because I've been involved in a few good groups over the years, even when Paul's getting kicked out, as we're currently doing right now. But the main thing is to have fun, joke around, you can try different types of games, like I said, different types of styles. And some people want it a bit more serious, some people want it a bit more light. Sometimes there's a bit of back and forth. And sometimes it's just a different style of game. And then maybe the next game that you play is a little bit lighter, a little bit darker, depending on what you like. So yeah, just keep an open mind is probably the most important thing, I guess, and to have fun.
Cool. So when I think of players, 3 words come to mind. I'll go through them in turn. The first one is chaotic. Players never seem to react to a situation the way that you expect them to. I have a great story about that. That just happened 2 or 3 weeks ago in a game I'm running. But it's like, you know, the whole gazebo effect. You start describing a gazebo too much and they assume that it's a monster you have to kill, right? And that doesn't make any sense, but that's just where they came from. The second one is self-centered, and I think it's not necessarily a bad thing, but you're creating this world and this story based on these people that your players are playing. And that just increases humans' natural self-centeredness to begin with, which can just make this weird uber-mensch kind of ball of sycophantism that can sometimes be really difficult to deal with. And the third thing, and it's the most important thing for players that I like to play with or run games for, is emotional. I really enjoy tugging at players' emotions and messing with those emotions and orchestrating them to get an effect. That's kind of what I enjoy about running games. And if they weren't emotional, then you couldn't get that out of them. So those are the 3 things that come to my mind.
I guess for me, so there's 2 things that come to mind. One is kind of along the lines of the self-centered, but not in kind of to the other side of it, the bad side of it. I think of players who don't involve others, and so part of this is coming from like a more of an improv background. A lot of it is yes and supporting the group, supporting, you know, the decisions of the group. Certainly played with people who did not have anybody but themselves in mind when they were taking action. And it's super frustrating. I haven't had to experience this as a GM, but I would imagine as a GM, this is super frustrating. Having done it as a player, it's very frustrating to have to deal with those folks. So I'm interested to hear how people have either dealt with that in the past or maybe fired those people from the groups if necessary. But on the other side of that, I think, John, you nailed it, of just like bizarre. I mean, the things that people will come up with that my mind would have never reached for, is super exciting and super interesting. So it's fun for me to just see how other people's minds tick in the player role.
Awesome. One other thing I want to add to is I've definitely experienced the importance of players bringing different energies and having, I don't know if it's like different styles of playing or just different styles of people in the group. I've been in groups where everybody's like chill, low energy. Everybody likes to overthink every decision before they make it. Those games, we all fall asleep. Whereas I've also been like the flip side with players where like everybody has a ton of energy and is like clamoring for ideas to share them, and having a balance of both, like the part of the group that's like more chill and considerate versus the ones that bring just like a ton of energy and feed everybody else's energy. And when they get tired of all the talking or just like, I jump in, my sword brandished, everybody's like, oh, okay, what's the plan to move the story along? I really appreciate. And so I think it's important to find that balance, the players, that the GM can't carry all the energy themselves. It's the players that need to bring that. I think that's the only thing I'd add.
Cool. Okay, so next question. What does fun look like for players? Anyone can go. Who wants to go first?
I don't think players get to decide what is fun for them. Like, you, as a GM, you have to mold that. You have to take a group of people, disparate people, and you have to make sure that you have the right mix of energy amongst them. And then you kind of have to direct that, hoping that you'll hit fun for everybody, But I think if you let players define their own fun, they wouldn't necessarily hit on something that's going to work, right? Like I had a player who literally, we eventually started calling him Kenny because he would die every single game doing something dumb, right? And it was blatantly dumb. And it was super duper not fun. And if you let him run that, he would just continue on to the end. Like that's just where you would end up. You have to kind of corral everybody's sort of energies and then direct them, or attempt to direct these like crazy atoms bouncing off each other in a sort of general direction that you've created, and then hope that you hit fun. I think a lot of the times, I don't know, that's kind of how I feel sometimes.
This kind of came up in the last conversation, I think, a little bit, but do you feel like that's due to him? Like, was that fun for him, but not the rest of the party, or was that?
Very much so. Very
Okay.
much so, yeah. What came up in the last conversation?
Well, yeah, I guess what I was going to touch on there is for folks who are newer to RPGs, sometimes it's not always clear the levers that you can pull. It's like, oh, everything's a battle. I have to go in and I have to fight it. And if that's the only lever they know to pull, then it's about defining those constraints and revealing the other options to them.
Well, I like those kind of players. I've played a character before, like in D&D, I played a half-orc barbarian. His name was Ulk, and literally, as a joke, his tagline was Ulk Smash, and it was basically he can either smash it or he has no idea what to do with it, right? And that kind of mentality is really easy to deal with, because you either find a player who you can kind of corral them with, so you like sort of partner them up with the conscience, if you will, right? Or you just start making things really, really confusing for them, or something along those lines. That kind of like single-minded, almost like you're playing a miniatures game, right? You're running into an encounter, you get a battle, you hit the battle, you move on, you get your treasure, blah, blah, blah. That's easy to deal with. Chaotic is like when you have characters in your world that are obvious that you're not supposed to just kill or attack. You know, you describe them and say, this guy's like level 10, you're level 2. You can tell that. You don't attack them, where they will just squish you. And he's like, well, I don't like what he said, I'm going to attack him anyway. I'm like, and I don't know about anybody else, but in my worlds, I create a world that the player interacts with. I don't necessarily cater that world to the players probably as much as some players are used to. So like, if you take a swing at a character who's way bigger than you are, he's just going to squish you and you're going to die, and that's life. Like, that's just kind of how it works. But that part, it's like, when they start doing plans without talking to other characters or other players, and essentially just make it like a me show and not think about anybody else around them, and in such a way that you can't really compensate, that's the stuff that I find really difficult to deal with.
A great example of that is like, you have that barbarian character who's really optimized to smash stuff, right? Like that's what they are. If every kind of scenario is one where they're like at the court dance having to do diplomacy, that character's gonna get real, or that player's gonna get really bored really fast. Sure. So providing opportunities for the players to create different kind of characters and then use them in appropriate ways is I think what they look for fun. But yeah, it's really like when you're like, okay, well, I'm bored with this scenario, so I'm just going to attack the barmaid randomly. Like, how do you run with that, right? And you're right, fun for one person, disaster for every other player.
The first time they randomly attack the barmaid, I'd probably let it slide. The town guards would show up or whatever, and that it would go the way it goes, but whatever. The next time, that barmaid would be a god, and there would be consequences, right? I'd be like, number 2, shame on me. No, we're not going to let that slide again, right?
Yeah.
I think I want to answer this question from the perspective of me as a player, thinking back to all the different games, that I have the most fun when there's a feeling of, I think, John, as you were explaining before, that level of emotionality, like that there's some risk, whether it's stressful or frustrating or mysterious, piquing my curiosity or problem solving. and then getting over that, leading to a feeling of satisfaction. So those two definitely bring some fun. And then the other piece is the teamwork piece, that if we all just wanted to play our own game, you know, we go play a RPG video game, but we're there at the table to solve this problem together. And so I always am surprised by players who love to just make it their own show, because to me, that's like, you would do that somewhere else. It's the attempting to solve the problem as a team, especially when we all bring like ridiculous and crazy different ideas, that makes it, I think, the most fun for me.
So I have a question for you, Stephanie. When you play, are you an orchestrator? Do you kind of bring the team together and give everybody roles and like look at how everybody can work together? Are you one of those kind of players, or do you tend to just sit in the background and hope somebody else does that?
I think that I still don't feel experienced and confident enough to actually orchestrate. I think that once I do find it easier to slip into my character in the space, I'll probably graduate to that orchestrating. But I'd be curious to see people who have played with me, whether you would disagree with that.
I don't disagree. My experience has been that there's never really been, I've not played with one particular person who is like, all right, team, you're the bag man and you're the muscle and whatever, and it just kind of naturally happens as you start playing. You start to see, hey, actually they did really well in talking to the last NPC. Maybe they'll step up and do it again. At least for me, I've always kind of erred on the side of I'll just see what happens naturally, just because I think, Steph, to your point, I just don't necessarily feel super confident in saying like, based on your personality, I think you want to play this way. I don't feel like it's my place to say that, right?
Yeah, and maybe it's the fact that the groups that I've been in, I think we have worked mostly well as a team, that we haven't necessarily needed to have an orchestrator.
So what I find is in groups without an orchestrator, what you'll end up is players endlessly plan and never actually execute. You need somebody who's like, okay, we've talked about these 5 plans. I think this is the good one. And whether it's through force of personality or logical persuasion, they say, this is the plan we should go with. Let's go do that. And if not, they'll just sit and spin and like, what about this? What about this thing? What about this thing? What about this other thing? Like, and they'll just do that forever and never actually get to the doing part. Anyway, that's not 100% true, but I find that quite often you need somebody that like leader position in your group that will say, okay, we've done this bit. It's time to actually go and do the thing. And this is the thing that we're probably going to do. And they can discuss it with the group and try to get, some sort of agreement, but they tend to, you'll tend to find somebody who's like, this is what we're doing. And we're going to go do it after some point in time. Like, I know for
this may seem idealistic, but I found it to be far more democratic in our scenarios. But that may not always be the case for everybody.
Fair enough.
Yeah, I think what Bill was saying is earlier about some people just naturally going into some roles tends to happen. And sometimes you do get 1 or 2 of those who do go into that leader planning role, but if you don't have someone going into that role, I have seen it where the wheels are just kind of spinning and nothing is happening. But that's where it's on the GM to go back and sort of move things along at the same time, to notice that you're kind of stuck in the mud right now. You need sort of a jump start or a hint to move people along, or give them something else to work with. Because like you said, John, they might just be stuck in what they're doing and overplan and overthink it and not actually do anything. So, but yeah, that's where I think it goes back onto the GM to help them out a little bit, just give them a little bit of a nudge to move it along a bit.
I'm gonna, in terms of the question, what helps players have fun? For me, it's discovery and exploration. And I was really reminded that first time I played Numenera, because all these creatures, I had no idea what they could do. And it was really bizarre. It wasn't really like in Dungeons and Dragons where a certain type of power has a certain type of level, so you only see it at a certain type of level. It was like you really have no idea what this creature can do, and often you didn't know how to interact with it. So I know as a player, I often look for exploration, discovery, or really not knowing what's going on, because when you've done 30, 40 years of role playing, it kind of gets, I find Dungeons and Dragons really hard now.
But it's really funny that you say that, because so I'm playing with one group, and they love the comfort of knowing, like, oh, it's a kobold. I know exactly how strong that is. I can kick that thing across the room at first level. It's like they love the idea that I know what a fireball does. I know how to pick a lock. Like, and they really like lean into that, understanding the mechanics of the game. And it's less about discovery. And it's interesting to throw things that they've never seen at them, because the panic level rises at such a great pace. It's great to do once in a while because they like that comfort zone. But all you do is you take a monster, you reskin it, call it something else, and all of a sudden everybody runs around like maniacs, because they now they're in that discovery mode that they're not comfortable with. So it's interesting to see that you can find groups of players who are on that spectrum on very different places.
Yeah, it's and to go back to what is fun, I've been trying to piece this together, because I think there's a few different ways to define that. One thing I always say is that danger is fun. Is that when I'm a player, I like it when the tension is ramped up a bit. I like it when I don't know if I'm gonna succeed or fail when I roll a dice, or if someone hits me, I'm like, am I gonna survive? I don't know. But that to me is fun. It's like watching a thriller. It's like you're on the edge of your seat. You don't know what's going to happen to you or your players. Are we going to make this? Are we going to do this? So that's one way I look at it. I know some people don't like that because it's too tense, I think. But I think to me it's a fun danger or a fun tension for doing that, sort of like watching a movie. And in another way of being fun is something that Stephanie mentioned. Like it's fun to solve the problem. It's fun to be like, oh, that's what the GM meant, or maybe not that meta, but be like, oh, that's where that puzzle fits together like that. And I think that's really rewarding to be able to feel that. And then I guess the last thing would be, on the flip side of the danger, when you succeed at something, then it becomes that much more beneficial, and it feels like there's a bigger payoff, because it's like, holy cow, we almost didn't survive that. And so you remember that. But even the failures, I mean, the spectacular failures are something that you'll remember decades or years later. So
now your group might fall apart if they fail.
That's quite possible, but you'll also remember that. But as long as that's fun, right? Some people don't like it because I think they might find it frustrating, or they want their character to go on. To me, I think that's just part of the fun and the drama. That's like characters sometimes die. That's just the way it goes sometimes. I don't have a problem with that at all. It's more of the overall story. You'll be telling someone, yeah, we tried to finish this, and then, Joe ended up falling into the volcano and dying. Tragic accident, but everyone's going to remember that from that moment going forward. So I think there's a lot of ways to define what the fun is, and it's all these different separate elements that can add up in different ways. So
I think one of the other fun things I've saw, particularly early in my RPG career, was having secrets that your character knows and the GM knows that keep popping up occasionally, and you think, fuck, are they going to find out? Shit. This could break up our whole relationship, and then you end up with an episode of Community kind of thing. But I think having good backstories and the GM kind of leaning into those backstories is a good way of hooking people in. So if you have your fighter character and this is not going to be a combat scenario, pulling them in a different direction, using their hooks is a really kind of like nice way of distributing it. Because I think one thing I think is really important is paying attention to all the players and seeing have I interacted with that player in a little while? Have they gone really quiet? Do they need more sugar? Like, how do I pick them back up again? How do I get them involved? Because maybe their character class is not suited to this particular task. So what are the other ways? And I think they're humans. So what motivations do humans have? Like, what can I pull out of them?
Eric, at some point we should probably chat about building characters and how to build a good backstory. Because I know for me personally, I have a really difficult time building a backstory before I've been in the environment. I need the constraint of the other players, the characters within it, to help kind of flesh that out for me.
Bill,
I could see that. Yeah.
I'm with you on the. I am actually, as a DM, I kind of loathe the backstory because I find that characters often write backstories as a way to drive plot lines, which so suddenly, you have five or six people show up at a table, in a big group, and everyone has a tragic backstory that needs to be resolved. A lost cousin, who's an heir to a kingdom. Like there's no way to bring all these together, and you either end up favoring one character over another because you're like, we can't follow all these plot lines. Whereas the more of the emergent plot line that comes when characters or players play together, where you're like, oh, that's interesting, and it grows more organically. I mean, some players love the 12-page backstory. I've had a few of those over the years.
Yeah, I'm going to come down the middle on that. I like the brief backstory that the players write, and then as a GM, I can help fill in those gaps. And you fill it in together with them, but things that are revealed as they come along that fit into that backstory, but aren't expanded upon, so that there's no room to maneuver in there. So I like, as a GM, having that to work with, and I'm hoping that players like that too. Obviously, if we do something that they don't like, then that can be changed. But I think I like that idea because then it's fun for both people. The player gets to develop that backstory a bit without having everything written out, like Paul said, in 12 pages, and there's nothing you can do because it's written in stone. Whereas this one, when it's partially written, just a few sentences, then you can fill in the gaps, and you can actually play that out a bit more. So I think something like that helps a lot.
When I get players to write a backstory, which I do find really important to kind of flesh out a character, what I like to tell them to do, and I try to be kind of prescriptive, and I say, I don't want you to write your life's history. What I want you to do is pick the most important event of your character's life, and then write me something detailed about that. Because in that, you get a lot of character spice. You get one thing they can pick that's super duper important, and you can kind of fill out the rest around it, right? And that's how I tend to write backstories. I'll pick like one thing that was really important to my character. This is kind of their defining moment so far in their life, and I'll write about that. But it's like an afternoon or a day. It's not like, this is my life story for the past 20, 30, 50 years, whatever, right? And that is easy to work with and gives them a lot of control over the little stuff.
Mm-hmm.
I will say players do underestimate how much a DM or a game master can dork with their backstory. I had one player who had this mysterious backstory that they were searching for this white lady who had helped them as a child, and they spent their entire life hunting for them. And as the DM, I'm like, okay, yeah, I can figure out who the white lady is. Oh, that's definitely death, and you've been hunting your death the whole time. So when they finally confront this mysterious white lady who's supposed to be their savior, it didn't turn out quite the way their backstory had set it up to turn out. So,
yeah,
which is very
like
entertaining
that
for me. Yeah.
Well, I think it is. Well, I mean, I can't speak for that particular player, but I would find that exciting, and I think that's a lot of fun because you're doing a twist on it, and you're continuing on the story. You're not just like working with the story that's already written, because that's boring. You're adding something new to it and twisting it in a different way. So I like that kind of stuff.
I think Mr. Twist is a good description of Paul.
Yeah.
I have no problem taking the players down terrible paths that they had not seen coming. That's just the way I like to roll. I think it's when players are looking for fun, they sometimes want things on a very narrow path. And they actually find fun when things fall apart. So, their backstory is actually an implanted thing. A wizard came through town and just changed their memory. And, then it's like, oh, okay, well, that's different. But your players have to be playing with the right group for that, the people who are open to experimentation and change. Otherwise, it's going to not go quite so well.
Something Duane said really struck a chord with me when we're talking about what players have fun doing. When you get a group of role players together in a casual setting, not playing a game or whatever, and just in a casual setting, the first thing that they do is start swapping stories about things that they have done in a game. And I think when it really comes down to fun, it is, will this make an awesome story for them to tell their buddies later in like 10 years, in 5 years, right? The things that really, those stories that stand out and that you remember, those are the things that are fun, because it's the thing that you can keep enjoying forever.
Yeah.
So one question for you guys, because I like the idea of proposing like a particular moment in time. And I know that I feel like I've experienced this with Eric, and you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I've done a backstory where I've gotten feedback like, hey, this is just a bit too generic. How do you stop that? Hey, everybody's aunt's dying. And that, it was a dangerous place. I'm sure a lot of people are dying, but if everybody's aunt is dead, it's not really that important of an event for any one person, right? So how do you encourage people to kind of think of those more off the beaten path backstory elements? Or does it just come with experience of watching, a lot of different types of media in terms of fantasy movies and things like that, and trying to figure out what's a trope and what's unique and things?
I know I'm a huge fan of the session zero, where you get together and you say, go as a group, how do you know each other even as players or as characters? And from there, I mean, it's zero characters are just like, well, you just found yourself at the job board and you all decided to adventure together. So forcing them to create some kind, like, it works sometimes, but you can force a few connections, like, well, maybe this guy's my cousin, or maybe she's grew up in the same village that I did, and from there you can start spawning some connections. But yeah, it can't be my village was wiped out by dragons or technovirus, and oh, by the way, this is my cousin who lives in the same village, who has no recollection of that particular event. Like, those things, you start to build a coherence between people, which I think is useful.
And it depends what kind of game you're playing, because we're all sort of referencing like D&D style, where, yeah, you meet in the tavern and stuff like that. But I have started to do bringing the concept of the group together even before we play. So when we did Call of Cthulhu, the whole team was private investigators that were hired, that were all just new hires to go and solve the mystery kind of thing. So right from the get-go, it was already put together. You could come up with almost any character. I think I had some narrow parameters of things that you could be, or that some people had to take. But other than that, it was pretty wide open. And there just had to be a reason of why you would take this job, kind of thing. So I think sometimes things like that can work out. Not always, but for something like that, then everyone doesn't have to be like, oh, I know your cousin, and I was your sister's postman or something like that. The GM can help bring that together, and then you can try and form that group together as to why some of those blanks are getting filled in.
I think movies also give you some good different ways to approach stories. One of them is they sometimes throw you in the action, like you're all in it now.
Yeah.
And maybe it's an escape, maybe you're in a combat, that's it. And then it goes back and explains the character background. So like I've played a few games and run a few games where session one is you're together, you're doing something. It's fairly small task to kind of get used to doing something. But later on, I will go back to each of the players and say, okay, so you did this during the game. This is what I'm sensing you want to play in this game. Let's work out what that looks like. And actually telling a story together, like over like on the phone or something else I would do in the past, is have a separate session for that character where we talk through their background and kind of like what motivates them. But letting them play out the character and try out this outfit of a character, particularly if it's a new character to them rather than their trope, because we all have tropes that we like to play and feel comfortable in. But if it's something new, then I want to help them kind of like grow that experimentation.
So here's an interesting question, and I'm curious what you guys think. How long does your average game run? Is it a 3 month? Is it a one shot? Is it over 2 or 3 years? I know we've all probably played long games and short games, but in general, when you're talking about like backstory and getting players to have fun, what length of game are you guys thinking about?
I think in my group with Paul that we're on right now, before we had longer ones that went on, but now since we have 3 different GMs that we rotate through and possibly a 4th one, we've sort of said that a GM runs a game for about 6 to 8 months, somewhere in that range. We know there'll be a lot of times when people can't make it. So I've actually written mine out when I do it as chapters. So I know that about 20 sessions is about what I need to run a game as a GM, and kind of what the players have the attention for before there's the need to go on to something else. So that's what I guess. So about 20 sessions between 6 to 8 months, somewhere in that range. We play it for about 2 to 3 hours a week. So about once a week kind of thing. So that's roughly what I've found, but I think we've just sort of developed this over the years. I don't even know why, Paul. It just sort of happened, and we've just sort of talked about it as it went on.
Yeah, I think it came down to also the group that we're playing. So speaking of players, like the group has a lot of quite novice players and a few very experienced players, and so the novice players wanted to experience a bunch of different kind of characters and games and different systems. So for that group, it made sense to say like, hey, look, let's not try to run a 5-year, Shadowrun campaign. Let's try running it for 3 months and see how people like it. And then if it's great, we keep going a little bit longer. And if it's not, we cut it off and play a different system. Because Duane, how many systems have we run now? It's got to be 3 or 4.
Yeah, probably even more than that now. Yeah, we've run quite a bit, and I think it's the experienced players. Like I want to try new ones too, not just the new ones, because I think I would get bored running a very long campaign past say a year if I wasn't playing anything else. So I like the diversity of the story, the diversity of the game, and the diversity of whoever's running it, whoever's GMing it. So it just brings a different feel to each and every time. So I like that a lot.
Why don't we do a quick poll kind of this group? What's the longest game you've ever played continuous campaign as a player?
4 years.
7 years.
Mine's probably like 3 months.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's so interesting because I'm thinking back to all the games that I've played that were not one-offs but were campaigns, and I'm trying to remember if I ever played something long enough to actually fully solve the initial issue or mystery. I don't know that I've ever actually finished like a written campaign. I don't know if we finished yours, Paul. I was trying to remember if there was something about witches and some mystery we're trying to solve, and I don't remember whether we did.
Kind of felt. I think that's the history of a lot of these games. They just kind of eventually fall apart as opposed to finish.
Because people's lives get busy and then it never wraps up. I don't think I've ever wrapped up a campaign, which is a little sad, actually, when I think about it, that I never actually get to know the answers to any of the mysteries that I am introduced to.
See, that's why I put I've put the session limit on them. So around 20 sessions or so, there will be a definitive ending to that story after that.
So if we're talking about number of sessions, maybe like the most I've played in one game is like 10, maybe more than that. But
it feels right to me as well. And I know we've played a lot more systems. I know that one of the things that Eric has wanted to do is introduce a lot of different systems to us as players so that we could get a feel for different ways of playing, other environments. I guess this is kind of leading into the bane of every group is scheduling, and how do you encourage groups to continue even when players drop in and out over time? And actually, Duane, you mentioned something. You said that your sessions are somewhere in the 2 to 3 hour range. I think most of ours are usually in the 4 to 5 hour range. And I think that's what makes it more difficult to kind of maintain.
Yeah, when we play for such a short amount of time, I found as a GM, I really had to come prepared, but it helped to prepare because if I knew I had that narrow 2 or 3 hour gap in there, I could really tailor it to that particular session. And there's only so many ways that the players could deviate from that in that small amount of time. So it actually helped to have the shorter sessions, at least as a GM, it helped.
So my White Wolf group that I run, we've been together now for about 3 years, and we're on the second campaign. And the way that I've been trying to keep people together, there's 3 things. The first one is, if you're gonna have a missed game or something like that, try to have something else instead. Do a board game night, get people together, have a party, like anything to kind of keep the vast majority of those players in that routine, keeps them kind of coming back and making that time. The number 2 thing is, when you lose a player, which we've gone through, we've probably slotted out 2 players in those 3 years, maybe 3, I think 2 though. Try to replace them with either somebody relatively similar or somebody that you've deliberately chosen to fill that slot, not just kind of send it out into the ether, find whoever's available and then slot them in, but really, like, I lost my player who tends to play a cleric or who tends to play kind of the healer carer of the group. Maybe going and finding somebody who's going to do that role again, or I think that we don't need that role, so I'm going to deliberately replace them with somebody else who will, and not completely tilt the dynamic of the group. Really, really helps in maintaining group cohesion. And then the third thing is, find other ways to play. So even if a player can't show up and be in the room, maybe you guys do a Roll20 session instead. Maybe you guys are just talking on the phone. Like, however it works, just try to, we've been in the coronavirus now forever. My group's gone from meeting physically every other week to we meet virtually every other week, right? You just have to find that way to keep people together. It can be a struggle though, like it can, but you gotta give it a go.
I think that actually loops all the way back around to the beginning of the conversation, is why do people play games? Like, why they're looking for fun, right? So if you can get them together to have fun in some way, even if it's not, the epic campaign that's running, even if it's just a night of board gaming or a night of getting together, or heck, just a Zoom call where everybody shoots the breeze for half an hour, is a way to keep the cohesiveness going.
See, in my 4-year-long gaming group, when we didn't have the right players to play the main campaign, that's when we would do one shots in another system, or we would like have a side campaign that we played or whatever. So you're running kind of 2 games or 3 games in tandem, but it's really like, oh, well, we don't have these players, so let's play this other thing instead.
I was just looking at how many games we've played in the last few years since we've been in Chicago, and it's 12 different types of games. And part of that is because most of the players have never done role-playing before. So trying to find kind of good games. And then I was counting the number of players who played with us in Chicago, and we've lost 14 and we have 4 as a consistent thing. Most of those
went through 18 players?
Yeah. Most of them left
Wow.
Chicago. That's the thing.
Yeah.
Because Chicago's like, a lot of people in the Midwest come here as part of their career or the university and do a couple of years here. And then they go on to San Francisco, Seattle, whatever else.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, we've seen a lot of players and a lot of different styles. The one thing to answer John's question, what I try to do is I'll run a campaign, but I'll run one segment of it and then stop. So there's the Ars Magica campaign that we've played. We wrote blogs and everything else so that we can go back to playing that again at some point. We did a Traveler campaign, and we'll definitely go back to that. And I actually written it, but I wanted a break as a GM. I wanted someone else to run something, because it can be, well, it's a lot of work being a GM.
It is.
But we're not going to cover that today. So back to players. But yeah, we've had a lot of variety. And I was mentioning the last game, like nobody had played Call of Cthulhu, so I have to run that, don't I?
Yes.
Because like
Yes,
unless
you
you've experienced that, like it's great. We did one, and then we did a second game. So I think we did 2 full Sundays of Call of Cthulhu. So like it was 8-10 hours of two separate scenarios. The characters actually all survived, which is rather surprising. But because I wasn't being the level of Paul Doerfling over here, you know, who's kind of mean evil. But I was playing it pretty straight, more like what John would describe as the world is a little bit unmalleable. But I've yet to run Paranoia because I've yet to really fuck with their heads. So this absolutely will play that at some point in the future.
Paranoia is the only game where I died twice before we actually started playing. That's what kind of game
You
that
can
is.
die while you're rolling your characters, I assume.
Yeah, because we started. It's a goofy satirical kind of game, and the GM is called the computer, and the computer knows all. So we kind of started playing before we even started playing, if that makes sense. And you can't. Everything you do is wrong in that game. So if it's a take on like a super Orwellian kind of atmosphere. So you know, if you get shot and you bleed, well, then you're breaking cleanliness laws, kind of thing. So everything you do is breaking a law. So it's kind of goofy. But yeah, I hear you, Eric. It would be fun to run that. Some players hate it. I know people that absolutely hate Paranoia, but it is fun for like that one shot when you need something to.
Oh, Paranoia is Hal from 2001 and Mel Brooks become one computer. It's perfect.
Yeah.
The reason I was asking about campaign length is going back to Bill's question about backgrounds. The way that you kind of guide a background, what's important in a background and what isn't from a player perspective, can in many ways kind of be geared depending on how long of a campaign you're playing. If you're planning on running 2-3 year campaign or even a year campaign, then what's in their backstory is going to run, you know, the first 6 or 7 sessions, and then you're going to have this world that you've made around it, and it's not as important. Or like me, I love running pre-campaigns. Like the Werewolf campaign that I'm running now, I spent the first 6 months doing preface. We just set up kind of what happened before, what's important and we're going to go do. And so backgrounds weren't super duper important per se, and like they can kind of write whatever they want to write. But if you've got a shorter campaign, 3 or 4 months, you kind of need to be real on point, and you need to actually like get those backgrounds before your player sits down at the table, and then hit them back with feedback and say, I like this bit, I like this bit, I don't really like this bit. Everybody's on side, nobody has a father. How about you play the character who actually has like loving parents who were fine? You know.
Yeah, I had a great life, and it led to naivety of the world. You know?
But like give that feedback and then expect that those changes to be made. Like don't just think backgrounds are something that players write and that's it. Like you can then read them and be like, I don't like this bit, I don't like this bit, can we work on it? And it's not going through and editing. Think of it more like you're creating a story together. It's just like, these are the problems I have with this part of the background. Can we change it? Can we alter it? Something along those lines is great.
Cool. I want to talk a little bit before we finish off about archetypes and different types of players. We've actually talked a little bit about them already, but more implicitly. So we talked about people that like to plan versus initiate. So initiate is not always like a thoughtful initiation. It's I'm going to go in and start smack them on the heads, which John has told us a few stories about, versus the person that procrastinates, plans, won't get to, the kind of thing. And then there's also the player that really loves the rules and likes to make sure you follow the rules exactly.
Rule lawyer.
Yes. Versus a player that's an actor and has got so far into character, it doesn't really care about what's actually happening with everyone else. What kind of archetypes have you seen? Like, try and think of one you've enjoyed and maybe one you haven't enjoyed, but let's not just focus on the negative.
Are you talking about characters that we've played?
No, talk about player
seen.
archetypes, different types of players. Generalization, stereotypes, archetypes, all of these words apply.
My favorite by far is the naive player. the person who's coming to the game for the first time with no experience having played an RPG, because they bring no preconceived notions to it, and it can be absolute magic when they roll that first die or have that first real success or understand that first concept. Like that archetype of the naive player, love them.
I do recall that. Eric, you had a new player here. I can't remember his name. He was a French guy and had never played, and I had never seen someone so wide-eyed when they played before. Every single thing that happened, his mouth was agape, his eyes were open, and he was just, in the moment the entire time. He only played a couple of times, which was very strange to me, but he seemed to have just loved it. I don't think I've ever seen that before, other than that one guy. But it's that thing that Paul just said, that that's maybe cranked up to another degree. But yeah, just seeing the looks on the new people's faces when they realize that they can do almost anything you want. Like, it's not like a video game where you have to do X to complete Y kind of thing. You can do anything, and when they see someone do anything, sometimes it takes them aback a bit. Like, oh, you can do that sort of thing. So yeah, it's fun to watch that and how that evolves, I guess.
I don't have a name for this archetype that I have in mind, but I've had two players like this, and John, you're one of them actually, who reads the system and then decides that what they want to do doesn't quite fit the system, so they manipulate the system to fit their character.
Just a little bit.
A little bit, yeah. I don't know if you have a good name for that, but I've had that a couple times.
If we don't have a name for it, we should totally name it, because like the
We
rules
should.
lawyer follows all the rules. That might be the rule politician, who kind of follows the rules but they do their own thing.
Yeah,
Finds
I
the
like that a
loopholes.
lot. I like that a lot. Yes, the rule
It's
politician
it's
for
the Better
sure.
Call Saul of characters. You just slightly work outside of the lines to accomplish it.
It's all about what motivates them, I think, is really the question, right? Like, if it's, and this is something when we talk about archetypes, game type or the game system you're running is super important. So like in D&D, you can have a rules lawyer. That's something that easily comes out because D&D is a very system run game. Whereas if you run something like White Wolf, there's not as much of a system built around that. You've got a lot more wiggle room, and the system isn't super important, so you tend not to have rule lawyers outside of LARP, which is a completely different question. But like, it tends to be a little bit different. Whereas like Cyberpunk, it kind of runs the line kind of either way, right? Like, depends the system that you're running, depends on the archetype. And when it comes to players who sort of change the system slightly in order to, or even a lot to kind of fit their character in there, it depends on what system you're running, right? Whether, or I'm sorry, it depends on what their motivation is. Are they doing it because they have a particular character in mind or a particular story they want to tell? Or are they doing it because they want a plus 20 bastard sword that they can just play all the monsters with, and like they just want that advantage, right? That's kind of the important part there, I think.
I agree with you. I think the systems have a big impact. The more crunchy they are, the more they seem to attract the rules lawyer. I'm thinking of Pathfinder. I've met many of that kind of archetype in Pathfinder, which is kind of why I hate the system. It's actually, but I think you're right. The actual community that forms around it, I wonder how much emotional trauma a lot of people went through for second edition, considering how long those rules have been around and been fixed for quite a while. Cool. What other archetypes do people think? I've definitely seen the computer RPGer or the computer gamer who's never done an RPG and then comes and then tries to max min because that's what they're used to from computer gaming. More the grinding games like Dark Souls or something like that. Kyle is definitely one of those. And
it's because the only reference that they have for RPGs were from video games, so that's how they often tend to start out. And no slight, it's just that's their experience.
Yeah, I think it's a good point. I think then you work out how do you, using John's words, corral people in a direction so that they don't stay in that kind of mentality.
Yeah, and it just takes time, right?
I assume that the min-maxers fall very closely to the rules lawyers in that it's a perceived advantage, right? Like, I want to put myself in a position that this is going to be a cakewalk. I don't have to struggle at all because I've got the most powerful person in the game. So, but I think that, to go back to our earlier conversation, that takes fun away from other players if every battle you walk into is a cakewalk.
Yeah,
I
There's-
find
I
there's a
find
very-
that boring.
Yeah, there's a variation of that character too, right? The min-maxer is one version of the person who's trying to win, right? Like for them, it's about winning the game, even though that's kind of the antithesis of most role-playing games. You're experiencing an adventure, but some people are like, I want to win the combat, I want to win the scenario, I want to yeah, the winner, I guess.
See, winners are really easy to get around because you just keep presenting them with unwinnable situations. You just like, you're either going to save the princess or you're going to save the child, but you can't do both. And I don't care what you do to do that. You got to pick one. And then you just keep presenting them with those kind of like no-win, bad choice scenarios over and over again. And eventually they'll understand, oh, what I'm trying to do here is tell a story or run through this world or whatever. Winning is not what is, it's not possible to even do, right? But I would push back and say that rules lawyers and min-maxers are very different players. Rules lawyers are pedants. They just want to be right. They don't necessarily always care about winning, right? If you pull out a dragon and you like fudge the roll and you fudge that dragon's bonus so that your players don't immediately die, I know plenty of rules lawyers who'd be like, no. You need to get that plus 10, not plus 5. That's not the way the rules work. Whereas a min-maxer will keep their mouth shut because they're winning.
And there are some games where you can't min-max, like it doesn't even, it's not even possible within the game, but you can always be a rules lawyer in any game.
It's fair.
Yeah.
One of the things that I found, the reason the campaign that I played lasted 7 years was Ars Magica. And it was because the character that we had, all the characters we had, all died. But we all shared one character, the Covenant. And we had all invested so much in that Covenant that, the companions died, the Grogs died, they're like bodyguards, fighters. A lot of them were unamputable. They'd lost a leg, an arm. We actually literally had a whole hospice for them at one point because there were so many of them. But the mage, most of our mages, one of them, we went through 1 to 3 mages depending on the character and what they did. But it was actually the shared character that they had. So like the base or the starship or anything else. In this case, a Covenant, that actually held us together. And even through children, because children are the darkest thing for parents role-playing because their lives go into chaos. And they have other things to do that are more important. Seems sad, but it's a reality, isn't it? I think having a shared character, coming back to John's comment around mechanics, almost may beget the actual community that forms around them. And I don't know if people really think about that in terms of what players does it attract. Stephanie, did you get to get your answer about the question about creating characters?
Oh, I'd like to answer that question before we wrap up.
Cool.
And I've had a while to think about it now. And I definitely wanted the chance to talk about it, especially since we started our conversation today about fun, because I think for me, in some ways, the part that I found the most intimidating about getting into role-playing was creating a character and then trying to embody, make decisions, say things as the character, keeping with that character. I found that really challenging. And so I've definitely been through a journey. So at the beginning, I just created characters that were me, but with some cool special powers. Mostly magic, because I grew up in Harry Potter and I just want to be a wizard. I just want to be a wizard every day. So I would get the chance to just play me, but as a wizard. And then I started evolving, because at one point Eric was like, you should probably try something besides just playing yourself. And I was like, that's a good point. This is a good exercise. So I then started by picking characters that I really liked from books or movies and basically creating them with a slightly different, I don't know, whether it's age or gender or power or whatever, but really keep the essence of those characters that I loved. And that helped me in the stage of like embodying that character a little bit. And then I played a system that introduced like one strength and one weakness. So that got me thinking about, okay, for each character that I'm going to create, I'm going to put like one thing that they're really into, and then one weird thing, like a quirk that like freaks them out. So I created one character that's like terrified of the dark, but also super embarrassed by that. So I won't say anything about being terrified of the dark. And I really, we didn't actually play more than 2 sessions with that character, which is too bad, but I was excited to get into sort of embodying that. Like if you're on watch and everybody else is asleep, you're not going to tell them you're afraid of the dark, but maybe you're going to make some excuses, or you're going to squeak a bit when people are like, who's on watch? Me, kind of thing. And I'm getting excited to continue to evolve that journey, because I'd like to bring in some like Adler psychology into it, with the idea of creating core beliefs for a character and then creating like one strong memory from their childhood as to where that core belief came from. And not to overwhelm it with that, but to use those core beliefs to help guide your character's decision making. So that's been maybe my favorite journey as a player, playing through different systems and creating different characters. And creating characters I used to find super intimidating, it's definitely become more and more fun as I've played. So
I only have Jungian characters instead of Adler-esque characters.
also an excellent choice, Duane. I
Psychology jokes. That's what we're going with here.
And I was about to take it seriously and say, if we're talking about archetypes, Jungian is a great place to create a player or character archetype.
Right, yeah.
I only have Pavlovian characters. They just react to stimulus. That's it.
They're just salivating the whole time.
Yeah,
the whole
that's
game.
right. Yeah, that's why the beard is there.
As a GM, do you have a little bell every time?
Every time a character does something special, I ding the bell and throw them a candy. It works out great. You just condition them to play well.
Okay, so we're going to wrap up now. Is there like, when thinking about, we talked about levers and pulling and helping players enjoy the session. Talk about one thing, just a quick sentence around one of the things you love to do that you've seen really kind of like bring players into a game, or that they've really thoroughly enjoyed.
Are you talking as a GM?
Yeah, as a GM, but that you've used as a lever to help players really enjoy the game.
I think I've found appealing to them individually. Sometimes the group goal can be dominated by a couple of people, or you're working on it together, and it's still satisfying. But I think sometimes when it's something in particular related to a particular character, whether it's a situation they're in, resolving something from their background, or something from their background comes up, or something along those lines, I think that can feel way more engaging, because you're the single person that you're interacting with. You're making that particular decision on whatever is coming up, or you're reacting to something in your background. I think that helps to really sort of solidify that bond and pull a player into a session or a story kind of thing. So that's something I've really noticed. So I try and do that a lot, and have a lot of like personal things that come up. And I have no problem splitting up the party to do that. I love splitting up the party all the time. So
I would say creating more complex NPC characters for them to have interactions with and build relationships. That helps to re-engage characters, especially if we've been doing a lot of fighting, as well as help them to develop their own characters.
I think for me, it's about saying yes to their ideas and what they want to accomplish. And even if it goes wrong, not punishing them for that. So for example, like, I want to jump the gorge. I'm like, that's a really long jump. Like, yeah, but I'm going to try anyway. Having them miss and crash to the bushes, and suddenly there's a carnivorous ape there. Like, that is way more fun, and they remember that kind of experience and really enjoy it, than just, no, you failed and fell down a cliff and take 10 die 10 damage and you're toast. Like, allowing them to really explore in ways that are enjoyable.
Mr. Twist.
I think that's one of the things that I'm working on. I haven't GM'd very many games, but I've chosen Numenera as kind of the one that I enjoy most. And to Eric's point, it has a lot of discovery elements to it. And so I'm working to get better at not telling and showing, or at least allowing them to explore to the point where they're finding out, like, oh, this giant crab creature has the heads of all of its victims floating up above it, and they all have, psychic abilities and whatever.
Sweet, that sounds awesome.
It was creepy though. It was pretty creepy.
Yes, definitely stealing that one.
My advice is always make your players cry. Like, not, and I don't mean, take away their toys or something.
I want to know your secret there.
But in every campaign that I've ever run, my goal is to eventually make the players cry at least once during the campaign. And what it shows is that, and it takes a long time and it takes a while. I've done it 6 times to have the entire group start crying. And it shows that they are emotionally invested in what they're doing and that they care about this world that you've built and the consequences of their actions. And that sticks with players for a really long time. And it's phenomenal when you can get it done. It can be a happy cry, it can be a sad cry, it can be a frustrated cry, whatever the cry, but like tears mean that you've done your job right.
That's impressive. I don't think I've ever seen that or experienced that in all my time. So that's impressive if you can do that, especially multiple times.
It's about the game systems that you run, probably for some of it. And like, I don't know, it takes a while, like twice it was 24-hour one shots are great ways to like get tension and just keep piling it on and piling it on and piling it on. And then you hit that end and you've got a just incredibly cathartic release that tends to just release tears, and everybody's tired and everybody's like overworked, right? That all works together.
I think it's one of the best Call of Cthulhu games I played at Gen Con was, it was past midnight. So we're all tired. And we were just being literally lots of investigation work and then basically run away kind of game. Understanding why each of the players are actually playing the game, why they in the room, why they, and I mean the real humans rather than the characters, understanding what creates anxiety for them, what do they enjoy in terms of comedy, and what upsets them. Trying to give a little bit of those to each of the players over a number of games is what I look for. But yeah, understanding how to, in Paul's case, twist their mind. In my case, it's like sometimes we reward them, but I would say that punishment is something that I don't necessarily go down to unless they decide to cross ethical boundaries that Eric disagrees with. And then I'm very happy to just kill them. But there'll be some like consequence. It wouldn't just be sudden death. It would be, oh shit, I see this coming. Oh, what can I do about it?
Yeah, I like that. I always say actions have consequences. You can do whatever you want in a game, but the actions will have a consequence.
Yeah. Cool. Thanks for chatting today. I hope you enjoyed yourself and got to know a little bit more. We have a few people that are new to each other, so that's always good fun. And we'll talk about what we should talk about in our next session. Have a good evening, all. Take care.
And I will say that, Eric, but before you turn it off, that I got a text from my friend in Japan who was the GM 25 years ago who killed me twice in Paranoia. So we do have at least one watcher out there and enjoying it.
Awesome. International audience too.
Yes, exactly.
I'm just reading the new rules. So when I've done that, I think we probably should set up a Zoom call and run through it. Because for some of you, Paul, you'll absolutely enjoy it because you like this sort of stuff. And then for some of you who've never played it, it's an interesting game.
Yes.
Probably best on LSD. Have a good night.
Bye.